Welcome to the Profile Corner. A viewer suggested a video topic to me discussing differences between US or Canadian made tools and foreign made tools. Those would be tools primarily made over in Asia, to compare the quality that you would see and also the price. One thing that he had mentioned to me is that in his experience setting up machines, is that he would see up to a 3/8 inch difference in different tape measures when trying to measure to the same point. He didn't mention exactly how far out he was measuring when he would notice a 3/8 inch difference, but that is apparently a problem. And you'll notice in my shop, I only use this Stanley tape measure when I'm doing measurements, or I use a ruler that's produced by Woodpeckers. Those are all guaranteed to be accurate within a very high degree. And so I cut down on the number of mistakes by always using the same ruler, or a high quality ruler that's known to be to a good tolerance. And so while I've got this Stanley tape measure, I've also got this Stanley tape measure, a small Stanley tape measure, and another 25-foot Stanley tape measure in the shop. I don't use any of these other tape measures when I'm doing woodworking projects. You may notice that if you use a different brand tape measure, you may see a wider variation in the measurements than you would see among different tape measures produced by Stanley. And so that's something that you've got to watch out for. In this video's topic, I want to discuss squares, however, not tape measures. So let me get these out of the way. Years ago, when I was going to auctions regularly, I found various squares at those auctions that other people had been using. For instance, here's a framing square that I found. And by comparing this framing square with about 3 or 4 other framing squares, as well as a couple other squares that I've got, I determined that this square is accurate. And so I'll use this square in woodworking projects. I also use this square to set up my radial arm saws. I've also got a Stanley tri-square that I measured against this framing square, and I found out that both of these read exactly the same. I picked up this tri-square at an auction, and so that was a good buy. I've also got a speed square here that I bought at an auction, and I compared this with the other squares, and I determined that this was accurate. However, the speed square that I bought 30 plus years ago, I tested that out with other squares that I've got here, and I determined that that square is not accurate. And so I no longer use that speed square. These types of squares are quite useful. However, there's certain times when you need a special square. This is a Woodpeckers saddle T-square. I'll bring it up closer to the camera. This has some functions that the other types of squares do not have. For instance, there's little holes here that you can stick either a 0.5 millimeter or a 0.7 millimeter mechanical pencil into, and then you can scoot this along the edge of a board to scribe a line. So that's a handy feature. This has 30 seconds and 16ths measurements on it, so that's also handy. And also, if you scoot this up against the edge of the board, you can mark down the side at the same location as would be this side of the square. And so that's handy for transferring measurements around corners of boards. So I use this quite a bit, and I found it quite helpful at times. I haven't used it a whole lot recently. However, the next time that there was a sale on Amazon during their Prime Day sales, I picked up a Woodpeckers T-square, and I found that this is also quite helpful to have at times. It's essentially a longer version of this type of a square. However, it does not transfer lines across the corner of a board, but this is still quite helpful, and the longer 12-inch long blade on it is useful in several different areas. For instance, scribing onto a table or something like that where you need 12 inches going out. I paid quite a bit of money for this square. Now, to put it into perspective, I've got a couple boards here in front of me. regarding the cost of this. This square cost roughly what 1.5 of these boards would cost. This is a black walnut board, surface 4 sides. It's 6.5 feet long and approximately 11 inches wide after it's surfaced. So it started out wider than that, and after surfacing it's 3/4 of an inch. So this T-square costs 1.5 times what you would commonly expect to pay for this black walnut board that I've got down here on the table. So this is about $150 when it's not on sale. I picked it up on sale for $130. To put that into perspective, you can do the math to figure out how much I calculated per board foot for that black walnut board if you so choose. And you may find that the price of the black walnut board varies by region and also what company you buy it from. So this was about $150 when it's not on sale. I paid $130 for it when it was on sale last year. And while that's still quite an expensive price, I thought it was a good deal because it offered quite a bit of functionality to me that I thought that I would use. And if I'm going to use something more than once or twice, I want to make sure that I'm getting a good quality brand that I know that's going to be useful for many years into the future. So in those cases, I would completely avoid the non-North American made products if I'm going to use it more than once or twice in the next 5-10 years. After I'd used this for a while, I thought, wow, it might be kind of handy sometimes if I had a 3-foot version of this T-square, especially when I was setting up the crosscut table on my table saw. I was having trouble trying to get a true 90-degree edge when I cut a 3-foot wide board. And I thought that it would be handy to have one of these to allow me to check whether or not I was getting a square cut. But after all, this framing square, I can get 18 inches in the one direction, but I can only get 24 inches the other direction, and so this would not have been very good. Yeah, I could use this edge down here as a reference edge, and so that would allow me to go out 24 inches on that 36-inch board, so I would get close. But I thought that it might be helpful to have a much longer version of something like this. But I wasn't sure how often I would use it. And so what that means is that I bought a foreign-made version of the tool that I really wanted, just to see whether or not I would actually use the US-made version of the tool. So what I bought is this AKNgoes 36-inch long T-square. The Amazon reviews were mostly positive regarding the quality of this tool, and there were several reviews saying that this T-square was just as good as the Woodpeckers version of the T-square that's 32 inches long. This is 36 inches long. So I bought it, knowing that it probably wouldn't be quite as good as the Woodpeckers brand, but I thought I would use it anyway and see how often I need to measure out 36 inches long, or how often I need to see if something's square 36 inches long. The issue that you've got with this, at least one of the issues, is that this reference edge here is quite short compared with the length of the bar. And so that means that just by default, you're not that likely to get a square edge if you're trying to measure out. However, if you push real hard on this against the edge of a board, you can usually get it to go in the correct direction toward 90 degrees. So I used this a couple times trying to set up the crosscut table on my Delta Unisaw, and I found that this never quite measured it right, because once again this reference edge here is too short for the 36-inch length to give you a true 90 degrees. So I thought that this would still be useful. I could slip it onto the end of a board and measure. So something just like that. And this would give me a straight edge, so if I needed to draw a line the length of the board, I could do that quite easily. And by the way, this board here is about 8 inches wide and 40 inches long. The street price of 2 of these boards is roughly the same price as what I paid for this 36-inch long AKNgoes straight edge T-square. So its regular price is about $80. I bought it on sale last year for $72, and I believe that Amazon just put it on sale for $67. So you might be thinking that this would be a good tool to use for at least getting a straight edge and maybe marking out. You can put a mechanical pencil into these little holes. I believe this is designed for either a 0.7 or a 0.9 millimeter mechanical pencil. I don't have any 0.9 millimeters. I've got a 0.7 somewhere in the shop here, but I've seemed to have lost it. I've got probably a dozen of these 0.5 millimeter mechanical pencils because I use these because they're much more accurate. And so you might be thinking that this would be a good value. You know, I thought it was a pretty decent value too, other than I couldn't get a 90-degree angle when I tried to use it to measure the edge of a board to see whether or not it was cut accurately. So recently, what I did during the last Prime Day event, this thing was not actually on sale. This is the Woodpeckers 32-inch long T-square. I bought one just because I thought it would be interesting to see whether or not I could actually use this in cases where the other AKNgoes version would not work for me. Okay, the reviews for the AKNgoes said that it was quite similar or just as good as the Woodpeckers version. Take a look at the difference. The reference edge of the Woodpeckers up here for 90 degrees is almost twice as wide as it is on the AKNgoes. So this has a street price of $80 when it's not on sale. This has a street price of about $200 when it's not on sale. Okay, so what are the differences between these? Well, I ran these through a battery of tests yesterday to try to figure out how good the AKNgoes version is compared with the Woodpeckers version. And I found a couple little problems with AKNgoes version. I've got a couple video captures that show the details of what I found regarding this AKNgoes brand. In short, what I found is that it's not flat this way, longwise. So that's one issue. It starts curving up right around the 30-inch mark, and then it scoots upwards. And if you turn it on edge this way, it has a similar problem where this section of the straight edge is not actually straight. This actually curves upward. And so if you're trying to use this as a straight edge, it's not very effective unless you're only using the first portion of the blade. That's where it seems to be accurate. With the AKNgoes ruler on the jointer bed, partially off the length of that jointer bed, we've got a 10,000ths gap from roughly the 30-inch mark all the way out to the end of the ruler. When I've got the end of the ruler lined up with this point right here. Just to confirm that it's not the bed of the jointer, this is a Woodpeckers ruler ending at the same point. There's no gap. With the AKNgoes ruler lying flat on the jointer bed, there's at least a 0.32 inch gap starting out at the 30-inch mark and getting progressively larger toward the end. In comparison, there's absolutely no gap underneath the Woodpeckers ruler. Okay, what about using it as a ruler? How accurate is it? Well, once again, I compared it with the Woodpeckers, and I found that there was a significant difference of about a 32nd of an inch, measuring out to 30 inches with these two. The measurement at 32 inches in length appears to be off by about a 32nd of an inch in the distance, and off of square by almost 1/16 of an inch compared to the Woodpeckers T-square. Okay, so which one's the accurate one? Is it the Woodpeckers version that has a guarantee of accuracy? Or is it the one that's made by AKNgoes that has no claimed warranty or no claimed accuracy? Well, now we've got a little bit of an issue. I don't know which one is accurate and which one's not. The Woodpeckers version claims that it's accurate to 0.004 inches per foot. That's in the length of it. And it claims that per foot, this is within 0.0018 inches of being an accurate 90 degrees. At least that's what it is based on my calculations. That's about twice the amount of allowed air as their standard squares are allowed. And so this is more than likely the most accurate square that I've got, at least among the foreign brands and those that I bought at auctions. Okay, so what is it worth to you using a cheap tool or an expensive tool? Well, if one of the tools costs the price of 2 pieces of black walnut, so roughly the equivalent of 13 feet of 1x12 black walnut that's surfaced 4 sides, is that a good investment? Well, I guess it depends on how many of those black walnut boards you're going to use over the course of the next week, month, or year. Or would you prefer to use a cheaper brand that claims to be flat, claims to be accurate, and yet is not flat and is not an accurate 90 degrees and does not measure accurately out to 30 inches? What's the accuracy worth to you? How many black walnut boards or how many oak boards or pine boards is it worth to you to have accuracy? That has to be a question to yourself. Is it okay to buy a tape measure that measures inaccurately by 3/8 of an inch out to maybe 16 feet? Or do you need greater accuracy than that? Now, this particular square required some assembly. I had to put in these 4 screws to get it to be assembled. The Woodpeckers, however, came fully assembled in a quite large box. Okay, now going back to the wood analogy here, in this box I have some black walnut sawdust. This is a black walnut sawdust that I collected over at the jointer when I was jointing this 1x12 board that I've got down here on the workbench. So this is 1/8 of the thickness of that black walnut 1x12 board. So you can probably figure out how many board feet this is worth of wood. Would you buy, let's say, 8 of these boxes of wood to equal the same amount of board footage as this 1x12 by 6.5 foot long board? Requires some assembly, right? You've got to glue it together yourself or screw it together yourself. Is that the same value as a board that you know is in good shape, that's flat and it's square? Well, to me it's not. So don't be buying wood chips or sawdust when you're trying to buy tools. Make sure that you're buying the best quality tools that you're able to afford. And when you're thinking whether or not you can afford it, don't just look at the current day. Think about 5 months down the road, 6 months down the road, a year down the road. Can you afford it 6 months or 12 months from now if you can't afford it now? If you can, maybe look and see if there's a way that you can still acquire the more expensive version of the tool that's domestically produced, or at least made in North America, if that's where you're located, instead of going to an Asian brand. You're more than likely to be happy with the result, especially if the domestically produced tool has some warranty insofar as its accuracy. And that's all for today. Thanks for watching. Bye.